He tipped her $100 just to humiliate her. He thought she was nobody, just another invisible waitress in a cheap uniform. But when Dominic Valenti, the most feared man in New York, asked her a sarcasm-laced question about money laundering, he didn't expect an answer. And he certainly didn't expect an answer that would save his empire $50 million in 20 seconds. Dominic thought he was the predator in the room, but he was about to find out that the woman pouring his coffee was the most dangerous operator in the city. This isn't a fairy tale. This is how the king of the underworld accidentally met the queen of the audit. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside the Obsidian, a dimly lit steakhouse on the edge of the meat-packing district, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of cigars, aged leather, and fear. This was not a place for tourists. This was the throne room of the Valenti crime family. Dominic Valenti sat in the corner booth, the one with the high back that blocked the view from the window, but gave him a clear line of sight to the entrance. At 34, Dominic was the youngest Don the Five families had seen in a generation. He was handsome in a way that unsettled people, sharp jawline, eyes the color of burnt espresso, and a stillness that suggested sudden violence. But tonight, Dominic wasn't violent. He was exhausted. "It's a mess, Dom," Silvio, his consigliere, hissed, keeping his voice low. Silvio was an older man, balding, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite and then dropped. "The feds are squeezing the construction unions. We have $40 million in cash sitting in the warehouse in Jersey. It's rotting. If we don't move it into the legitimate accounts by the end of the quarter, the IRS audit on Valenti Heavy Industries is going to trigger a RICO case." Dominic rubbed his temples. "What about the casino route?" "Too slow," Silvio said, tapping a thick manila folder on the table. "They've tightened the reporting limits. We can't wash more than 10 grand a day without flagging. We need a miracle, or we need to start burning money." Dominic sighed, leaning back. The stress was a physical weight on his chest. He was a master of strategy, a brutal enforcer. But the modern world of forensic accounting was an enemy he couldn't shoot. He needed a financial wizard, but hiring one meant exposing the family's books to an outsider. "Refill?" The voice was soft, devoid of emotion. Dominic looked up. Standing there was the waitress. She'd been serving them for an hour, and he hadn't looked at her face once. She was aggressively average. Brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, a uniform that was a size too big, and glasses that slid down her nose. Her name tag read Sarah. She held the coffee pot hovering over his cup. Dominic, agitated by Silvio's bad news, felt a sudden cruel urge to lash out at someone safe. "Tell me, Sarah," Dominic said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. He gestured to the spread of papers on the table, spreadsheets filled with numbers that would send them both to prison for life. "You look like a smart girl. You go to college?" Sarah paused. Her eyes, a striking shade of green behind the thick lenses, flickered to the papers, then back to him. "I did. A long time ago." "Good for you," Dominic sneered, fishing a crisp $100 bill from his pocket and flicking it onto the table. It landed in a puddle of condensation. "Here's a tuition bonus. Now, humor me. My friend and I have a problem. We have a lot of inventory that we need to turn into bankable assets without the government noticing. If you were the boss, how would you handle a liquidity crisis involving $40 million of unregistered funds?" Silvio chuckled darkly. "Boss, leave the girl alone. She's trying to work." "No, I want to hear it," Dominic said, locking eyes with her. "Come on, Sarah. Give us some financial advice. Blow my mind." It was a bully's move. He expected her to stammer, to say she didn't know, to take the $100 and scurry away. Sarah didn't scurry. She set the coffee pot down on the service tray with a deliberate clink. She looked at the $100 bill, then at Silvio, and finally, she looked straight into Dominic's soul. The meek waitress facade evaporated instantly. Her posture straightened. The boredom in her eyes was replaced by a razor-sharp intelligence that made the hair on Dominic's arm stand up. "You're trying to funnel cash through a construction union," she said. Her voice was no longer soft. It was crisp, authoritative. "I overheard you talking about the union audit. That's a 1990s strategy. The forensic algorithms the IRS uses now look for variable labor cost spikes. You'll be flagged in 3 weeks." The silence at the table was deafening. Silvio's hand drifted toward the gun inside his jacket. Dominic held up a hand to stop him, his eyes wide. "Excuse me?" Dominic whispered. Sarah ignored the threat in the air. She leaned in, placing one hand on the table. "You don't need a casino. You need a reverse triangular merger. You find a failing biotech firm listed on the NASDAQ, something trading under $1 with high R&D expenditures. You buy the debt through a shell company in the Cayman Islands, then convert that debt into equity. You funnel your $40 million in as angel investment through a blind trust in Luxembourg. The high R&D costs justify the cash burn, so no profit is recorded, meaning no tax event. You sell the company 6 months later to a larger pharma corp. The money comes back to you as capital gains, clean, taxed, untouchable." She picked up the coffee pot again, her face returning to a mask of boredom. "And by the way," she added, nodding at the spreadsheet visible on top of the pile, "your accountant made a rounding error in column G. You're leaking 3% to a shell company called Blue Horizon. If that's not yours, someone is stealing from you." She picked up the $100 bill, tucked it into her apron, and poured his coffee. "Enjoy your steak, gentlemen." She walked away, vanishing into the kitchen. Dominic sat frozen. He looked at Silvio. Silvio looked like he had seen a ghost. "Silvio," Dominic said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and awe. "Check column G, right now." Silvio pulled a calculator, his fingers shaking. He punched in the numbers. He stopped. He punched them in again. He looked up, his face pale. "She's right," Silvio whispered. "Someone is skimming. 3%, that's $2 million this year alone." Dominic stood up, buttoning his jacket. The exhaustion was gone. The predator was back. "Get the car," Dominic commanded, "and bring the girl to me. Don't hurt her, but do not let her leave this building." Sarah Miller, or rather, the woman currently using the name Sarah Miller, knew she had messed up the moment the words left her mouth. She stood in the back alley behind the obsidian, the rain soaking through her thin uniform. Her hands were shaking as she lit a cigarette. "Why did I do that?" she chastised herself. 2 years of hiding. 2 years of being invisible. And I blew it because my ego couldn't handle a mobster talking down to me. She wasn't Sarah Miller. She was Alexandra Lexi Graves. 3 years ago, she had been the CFO of Meridian Global, a massive hedge fund. She was a prodigy, the youngest woman to ever grace the cover of Forbes, under the headline, "The Math of Money." But then she had found the discrepancies. Meridian wasn't just hedging funds. They were laundering money for the Kozlov syndicate, the brutal Russian Mafia. When she tried to go to the SEC, her car exploded. She wasn't in it, but the message was clear. She wiped her identity, drained her emergency accounts, and ran. She needed to leave. Now. She stomped out the cigarette and turned toward the employee exit to grab her bag. "Leaving so soon?" The voice came from the shadows. Sarah froze. 2 men in dark suits blocked the alley exit. Behind her, the heavy steel door of the restaurant swung open. Dominic Valenti stood there, flanked by Silvio. The rain hammered down on them, but Dominic didn't seem to notice. He looked at her like she was a diamond he had just found in the mud. "My shift is over," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Your shift at the restaurant is over," Dominic corrected, stepping into the rain. He moved with a grace that was terrifying. He stopped 2 feet from her. He smelled of expensive cologne and gun smoke. "But your new shift is just starting." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, clutching her arms. "I just repeated something I saw in a movie. The Wolf of Wall Street, maybe." Dominic let out a low, dry laugh. "I've seen The Wolf of Wall Street. They don't cover reverse triangular mergers in Luxembourg, and they certainly don't spot a 3% skim in a forensic ledger from 5 feet away upside down." He took a step closer. "Who are you?" "Sarah Miller. I'm from Ohio." "Bullshit," Dominic said pleasantly. "I had Silvio run Sarah Miller while I finished my steak. Social Security number belongs to a woman who died in 1998. You have no credit history prior to 2023. You live in a walk-up in Queens. Cash only. You're a ghost." He held out a hand. "I have a problem, Sarah. A $40 million problem. And apparently, I have a thief in my organization who is stealing from me. You spotted it in 10 seconds. My accountant has been on payroll for 10 years and missed it." "That sounds like a personal problem," she snapped. "I'm not a criminal." "You are now," Dominic said, "because you know about the 40 million, which means I have 2 choices. Choice A, I put a bullet in your head right here in this alley and leave you for the sanitation trucks." Sarah flinched. The men at the end of the alley shifted. "Or choice B," Dominic continued, his voice lowering to a seductive baritone. "You get in the car, you come to my office, you fix my books, you find the rat who is stealing from me. In exchange, I pay you $500,000, tax-free. And I offer you something you clearly don't have." "And what is that?" she asked, her breath catching. "Protection," Dominic said. "You're hiding from someone, Sarah. People with your skill set don't wait tables unless they are running for their lives. Whoever is chasing you, they won't touch you if you belong to me." Sarah looked at him. The rain dripped from her nose. She thought about the Russians. She thought about the constant looking over her shoulder. She looked at Dominic Valenti. He was dangerous, yes, but he was a different kind of monster than the ones hunting her. And God help her, she missed the numbers. She missed the game. "1 million, she said. Silvio choked. "What?" $1 million, Sarah said, lifting her chin. "And I want a safe house, not one of yours. One I choose. And I want access to the main server, unrestricted." Dominic stared at her for a long second. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Deal." He opened the back door of his black SUV. "Get in, Sarah. We have work to do." The Valenti headquarters was not a smoky back room. It was a penthouse office in Midtown Manhattan, operating under the front of Valenti Import-Export. Sarah, Dominic had stopped calling her that in his head, referring to her now simply as the asset, sat behind a massive mahogany desk that was usually reserved for the CFO. It had been 3 hours. She had 3 monitors set up, her fingers flying across the keyboards. Dominic sat on the leather sofa across the room, watching her. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, but he hadn't taken a sip. He was mesmerized. She worked like a conductor. She wasn't just looking at numbers. She was seeing the matrix of his entire empire. "You're sloppy," she muttered, not looking up. "Excuse me?" Dominic bristled. "Your legitimate businesses," she said. "The waste management firm, The construction unions, the trucking logistics. They are bleeding money. Not because of the feds, but because of incompetence. You have redundant assets everywhere. I can trim 15% of your operating costs just by consolidating your insurance policies. I didn't hire you to save me money on car insurance, Dominic grunted. I hired you to clean the dirty cash. She spun her chair around. She had taken off the oversized glasses. Her face was striking, intelligent, fierce, and tired. I already did, she said. Dominic sat up straight. What? The crypto layering, she said, gesturing to the screen. I set up a bot network. It's buying NFTs of digital art generated by AI, selling them back to wallets you control, and then cashing out through a decentralized exchange in Malta. The 40 million is currently moving through thousands of microtransactions. By morning, it will be sitting in your clean account at Zurich Horizon Bank, looking like profit from a tech startup exit. Dominic stood up and walked to the desk. He looked at the screen. It was a waterfall of code, green and fast. You did that. In 3 hours. I was bored, she shrugged. But we have a bigger problem. The rat, Dominic said, his eyes darkening. Yes. I traced the Blue Horizon shell company that was skimming the 3%, she said. She hesitated. This was the dangerous part, delivering bad news to a man who killed people for a living. And? It's not an external hack, Dominic, she said, using his name for the first time. It rolled off her tongue with a familiarity that made his pulse spike. The authorization codes for the transfers came from inside this building, specifically from a terminal on the 40th floor. Dominic's face went cold. The 40th floor is executive access only. Only 3 people have offices there. You, Sarah said, counting on her fingers. Silvio. She paused. And who else? Dominic demanded. Your brother, Sarah whispered. Luca. Dominic flinched as if he had been slapped. Luca, his younger brother, the one he had protected his whole life, the one he had given the casino operations to. You're lying, Dominic snarled, slamming his hand on the desk. Check it again. I checked it 3 times, Sarah said, standing up to meet his gaze. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was in her element. The digital signature matches. Luca is funneling money out of the family. And judging by where he's sending it, he's not just stealing, he's building a war chest. For what? To start his own family, Sarah said, or to take over yours. Dominic turned away, walking to the window. He looked out at the city skyline, the lights reflecting in his eyes. The betrayal tasted like ash in his mouth. If you are wrong, Dominic said, his voice low and deadly, I will kill you myself. I'm not wrong, Sarah said softly. Suddenly, the elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged. Dominic whipped around. It was 3:00 a.m. No one should be here. The doors opened, and Luca Valenti stepped out. He was younger than Dominic, flashier, wearing a white suit that looked ridiculous in the rain. He was smiling, but his eyes were hard. Behind him were 4 men Dominic didn't recognize. They were holding submachine guns. Dom, Luca said, spreading his arms. Working late? And who is the pretty lady? Dominic's hand went to his hip, but he realized he had left his gun on the sofa. Luca, Dominic said, his voice calm. What are you doing here? Just checking the books, Luca grinned. I heard you brought in a specialist. I wanted to meet her before the restructuring. Luca snapped his fingers. The 4 men raised their weapons. Sarah dove behind the heavy oak desk, just as the glass partition behind her shattered under a hail of bullets. The sound of a submachine gun in a confined space is deafening. It doesn't sound like a bang. It sounds like the air itself is being ripped apart. "Stay down!" Dominic roared, diving from the open floor toward the heavy leather sofa where he'd left his weapon. Bullets chewed up the carpet inches from his heels, sending puffs of expensive wool and dust into the air. Sarah curled into a ball beneath the mahogany desk, her hands over her ears. The wood above her splintered and cracked as rounds slammed into it. She was hyperventilating, her mind racing. This is it. This is how I die. Not by a Russian hitman, but caught in a fratricidal war between Italian mobsters. Dominic reached the sofa, sliding on his knees. He grabbed his gun, a silver-plated Sig Sauer, and didn't hesitate. He popped up, fired 2 controlled shots, and ducked back down. One of Luca's men dropped, a red bloom exploding on his white shirt. "You're getting slow, brother," Luca shouted over the gunfire. He was safe behind a marble pillar near the elevator bank. "I told you, the old ways are dead. You're trying to run a Fortune 500 company. I'm trying to run a crime family." "You're running a graveyard," Dominic yelled back. He looked toward the desk. "Sarah, can you hear me?" "I'm here," she screamed, her voice shaking. "I'm going to provide covering fire. You need to crawl to the heavy door on your left. That's the server room. It's bulletproof. Go." "No," Sarah yelled back. Dominic paused, shocked as, "What did you say?" "The server room is a trap," she shouted, her mind flashing back to the schematics she had reviewed 10 minutes ago. "It locks from the outside during a security breach. If we go in there, Luca traps us and gasses us out. We need the maintenance shaft behind the wet bar." Dominic looked at the wet bar on the far side of the room. It was 30 feet of open ground. "Trust me," she pleaded. Dominic gritted his teeth. He had known this woman for 4 hours, and she was already countermanding his tactical orders. But she had been right about the money. She had been right about Luca. "On my mark," Dominic yelled. He stood up, exposing himself to fire, and unleashed a barrage of bullets toward Luca's position. It forced Luca and his remaining 3 gunmen to duck. "Move, go, go!" Sarah scrambled out from under the desk, running in a crouch. Her heels slipped on the polished floor, but she regained her balance, sprinting toward the bar. Dominic moved backward, firing steadily, covering her retreat. A bullet grazed Dominic's shoulder, tearing through his suit jacket. He grunted, but didn't stop. He vaulted over the bar just as the mirror behind it shattered into 1,000 shards. "The hatch!" Sarah gasped, tearing bottles of scotch and vodka off the shelves. "It's behind the cooler!" Dominic shoved the heavy industrial cooler aside with a groan of exertion. Behind it was a dirty, waist-high metal grate. He kicked it in. "Ladies first," he panted, blood seeping through his white shirt. Sarah scrambled into the dark, dusty tunnel. Dominic followed, pulling the cooler back in place just as the office door was kicked open. "Where did they go?" Luca's voice screamed, muffled by the wall. "Find them! Burn the whole building down if you have to." They crawled through the darkness. The shaft was tight, smelling of rust and old grease. They slid down a chute that dumped them into the basement laundry room of the hotel below the offices. Dominic hit the concrete floor hard, rolling to his feet, gun raised. The room was empty, save for the hum of industrial dryers. He looked at Sarah. She was covered in dust, her uniform torn, her hair wild. She looked terrified, but she was standing. "The maintenance shaft," Dominic said, breathing hard. "How did you know?" "I checked the architectural blueprints when I logged into the server," she said, her chest heaving. "I always look for the exits. It's a habit." Dominic holstered his gun. He walked over to her, reached out, and brushed a smudge of grease off her cheek. His eyes were intense, adrenaline-blown pupils dilating. "You saved my life, Sarah." "Lexi," she whispered. "What?" "My name," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not Sarah, it's Lexi. Alexandra Graves. Dominic stared at her. The hedge fund queen, the one who vanished with $20 million of Russian money. I didn't steal it, she said defensively. I froze it to keep them from buying a senator. But yes. Dominic threw his head back and laughed. It was a dark, jagged sound. Silvio told me to hire a waitress. Instead, I hired the most wanted woman on Wall Street. He grabbed her hand. Come on, Lexi. If Luca is smart, he's already watching the street exits. We're taking the subway. The safe house was a brownstone in Brooklyn, listed under the name of a shell corporation that supposedly sold orthopedic shoes. It smelled of bleach and stale air. Dominic kicked the door shut and locked all 3 deadbolts. He didn't turn on the lights. He moved through the dark with the familiarity of a man who had lived half his life in the shadows, closing the blackout curtains before clicking on a single table lamp. Lexi sank onto the dusty sofa. The adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't clasp them together. You're bleeding, she said, pointing to his shoulder. Dominic glanced at the tear in his jacket. It's a scratch, through and through. Didn't hit bone. Sit down, she commanded. I need vodka and a sewing kit. Do you have a sewing kit? Bathroom cabinet. Bottom shelf. 10 minutes later, Dominic sat shirtless on a kitchen chair while Lexi poured cheap vodka over the wound. He hissed through his teeth, but didn't pull away. You have good hands, he murmured, watching her thread the needle. Steady. I was pre-med before I switched to economics, she said, her eyes focused on his skin. She pierced the skin with the needle. Dominic's muscle jumped, but he stayed silent. Numbers made more sense than people. Numbers don't lie. People lie. People shoot at you. Luca, Dominic said, the name coming out like a curse. I gave him everything. I covered his debts. I cleaned up his messes. When our father died, I made sure he had a seat at the table. Money changes people, Dominic, Lexi said, tying off the stitch. Or maybe it just reveals who they really are. Luca saw an opportunity. The audit was the pressure point. He was going to let the IRS take you down, seize the assets, and then he'd step in as the clean brother to rebuild. He didn't count on you, Dominic said. He turned to look at her. They were close now. Too close. The air in the room felt suddenly thick, charged with the electricity of survival. Dominic's chest was bare, a map of scars and muscle. Lexi felt a flush rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the room temperature. Why did you help me? Dominic asked softly. You could have run. When the shooting started, you could have stayed under that desk and told Luca you were just a hostage. He might have let you go. He would have killed me, Lexi said. He saw my face. And besides, she looked down at her hands. You asked for my advice. You listened to me. Men like you. Men like the ones I used to work for. They never listened. They just took. Dominic reached out and lifted her chin with his finger. His touch was surprisingly gentle. I'm listening now, Lexi. What's our next move? Lexi swallowed hard. She stepped back, needing distance to think. She walked to her laptop, which she had miraculously managed to shove into her bag during the escape. She set it up on the coffee table. We have a window, she said, her voice shifting back to professional mode. I moved the $40 million to the Zurich account. Luca doesn't have access to that. That's your war chest. But Luca has the physical assets. He has the men, the warehouse, the weapons. I have loyalists, Dominic said. Silvio, capos in the Bronx. If I can reach them... No, Lexi cut him off. If you reach out now, you die. Luca will be monitoring the comms. He'll be tracking your known associates. If you call Silvio, and Silvio is compromised, we're dead in an hour. Silvio would never betray me. Dominic growled. Check column G, Lexi countered. Dominic fell silent. We need to starve him out, Lexi said, typing furiously. Luca is leveraged. I saw his personal accounts when I was scanning the system. He's in debt to the triads, gambling losses, massive ones. That's why he's making a move now. He needs quick cash to pay off the Chinese mob. She looked up, a wicked grin spreading across her face. So let's bankrupt him. Dominic leaned forward. How? We trigger a margin call, Lexi said. Luca is using the family's construction contracts as collateral for his loans. I can hack the municipal database and flag those contracts for safety violations. The city shuts down the job sites tomorrow morning. The cash flow stops. The triads get nervous. They come looking for their money. Dominic stared at her with a mixture of terrified admiration and pure lust. You are dangerous. I'm an auditor, Dominic, she said. We're the most dangerous people on Earth. She hit enter. Done. By 9:02 a.m., Luca Valenti will be technically insolvent. Dominic laughed, a genuine hearty laugh this time. He stood up and walked over to her. He didn't stop until he was inches away. You just declared war on my brother using a laptop. Beat that with a gun, she challenged. Dominic wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her flush against him. I think I prefer your way. He lowered his head. Lexi didn't pull away. She tipped her head back, her eyes fluttering shut. His lips met hers, hungry, desperate, tasting of vodka and rain. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a promise. Lexi wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her hands in his thick, dark hair. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like a partner. But the moment shattered with a chirping sound. Lexi pulled back, breathless. What is that? Not my phone, Dominic said, reaching for his pocket. I tossed mine in the sewer. It's not mine, Lexi said. They both looked at the laptop. A red window had popped up on the screen. It wasn't an error message. It was a chat request. User. Red Winter has entered the chat. Lexi's face drained of blood. She stumbled back, clutching the table. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Who is Red Winter? Dominic demanded, his hand going for his gun. The Russians, Lexi gasped. The Kozlov Syndicate. They found me. Red Winter. Hello, little bird. We saw the transaction to Zurich. Only one person writes code that elegant. We have your location. 1422 Decatur Street. We will be there in 5 minutes. Dominic read the screen. He looked at the door. He looked at Lexi. They tracked the IP, Lexi cried. I was careless. I was focused on Luca. I forgot about the back door I left in the banking algorithm. Dominic grabbed his jacket. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. 5 minutes, Dominic said calmly. We have to move. Dominic, they are Spetsnaz, professional hitmen. You're injured. We have no backup. Dominic racked the slide of his gun. He walked to the wall and pulled a loose floorboard up, revealing a hidden cache, an assault rifle and 2 grenades. He tossed the rifle to Lexi. Do you know how to use this? I've been to a range twice. Point it at anything that speaks Russian and pull the trigger, Dominic said. He walked to the window and peered through the crack in the curtains. Black SUVs were turning onto the street at both ends. They were boxed in. It's not just the Russians, Dominic said grimly. That lead car, that's a Lincoln. That's Luca. They're working together, Lexi asked, horrified. Luca sold me out to the Russians, Dominic realized. He promised them your head in exchange for their support. He turned to her. The look in his eyes was fierce. We aren't running this time, Lexi. If we leave this house, they cut us down in the street. We hold the ground here. 2 against an army?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dominic smiled. It was the smile of the devil himself. "No, I made a call while you were stitching me up. I didn't call Silvio. I called the only people who hate the Russians more than I do." Tires screeched outside. Doors slammed. "Who?" "The FBI," Dominic said. Lexi's jaw dropped. "You called the feds? You're a Don. You don't call the police." "I didn't turn myself in," Dominic winked. "I tipped them off that the most wanted Russian hit squad in America was converging on this location. The feds are about 2 minutes out. We just have to survive the next 120 seconds." The front door exploded inward. "Get down!" The hallway disintegrated in a storm of wood splinters and drywall. Dominic flipped the heavy oak table onto its side, shoving Lexi behind it, just as the first wave of bullets shredded the sofa where they had been sitting seconds before. "Stay low!" Dominic roared, popping up over the rim of the table. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession. 2 Russian mercenaries in tactical gear crumpled in the doorway. Lexi clutched the assault rifle to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had balanced billion-dollar ledgers. She had stared down federal prosecutors. But the smell of cordite and blood was a terror she had no metric for. "Lexi!" Dominic grabbed her shoulder, shaking her out of the freeze. "I need you to cover the window. If they breach the glass, we're flanked." I can't. You are Alexandra Graves," Dominic shouted, his eyes fierce and wild. "You dismantled a hedge fund with a spreadsheet. This is just physics. Point and shoot." Glass shattered behind them. A grappling hook flew through the window, catching on the curtains. Lexi didn't think. Instinct took over. She swung the rifle around, squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second, and pulled the trigger. The recoil bruised her shoulder, the gun kicking wildly, but the spray of bullets severed the rope. A scream echoed from the alley below as the climber fell. "Good girl," Dominic grinned, reloading his clip. Outside, the world exploded into red and blue lights. The wail of sirens cut through the gunfire. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. The Russians in the hallway hesitated. This wasn't part of their contract. Killing a rival mob boss was business. Getting into a firefight with the FBI was suicide. "They're falling back," Dominic realized, listening to the shouting in Russian. "They're engaging the feds. We have to go," Lexi yelled. "The FBI will arrest us too." "Not yet," Dominic said, his gaze fixed on the shattered doorway. "Not everyone is running." From the smoke and debris of the hallway, a figure emerged. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a white suit, now stained with soot. Luca. He walked into the room calmly, stepping over the body of a Russian mercenary. He held a gold-plated revolver. He looked deranged, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You called the cops, Dom?" Luca laughed, a high, frantic sound. "That's against the code, you rat." "You sold me to the Russians, Luca," Dominic said, standing up slowly from behind the table. He kept his gun leveled at his brother. "You broke the code first." "I did what I had to do," Luca screamed, pointing the revolver at Dominic. "You were weak. You were turning us into accountants. I wanted to be a king." "You're not a king," Lexi's voice rang out. Luca's eyes flicked to her. She stood up, the rifle trained on him. Her glasses were gone, her hair wild, her face smudged with gunpowder. She looked terrifying. "You're a bad investment," she said coldly. "I checked your liquidity, Luca. You're broke. The Triads own you. The Russians own you. You leveraged the family assets to pay for your gambling addiction. You aren't taking over the throne. You're just looking for a bailout." Luca's face twisted in rage. "Shut up, Waitress." He swung the gun toward her. Bang! The shot didn't come from Luca, and it didn't come from Lexi. Dominic lowered his smoking gun. Luca looked down at his chest. A single dark hole had appeared in the center of his white shirt. He looked back at Dominic, a look of pure confusion on his face. "Dom," he whispered. "Column G, Luca," Dominic said softly. "You should have checked the math." Luca crumpled to the floor. Outside, the firefight was intensifying. The FBI was breaching the front door. "The basement," Dominic said, grabbing Lexi's hand. "There's a coal chute that leads to the subway tunnel. Move." They sprinted past Luca's body without looking back. As they reached the kitchen, the front door was rammed open. "FBI! Clear left! Clear right!" Dominic kicked the grate of the chute open. He helped Lexi slide into the darkness. Just before he followed her, he tossed a single incendiary grenade back into the living room. He dropped into the chute and pulled the grate shut. Above them, a dull whoomp shook the floorboards as the grenade went off, filling the room with smoke and fire, erasing the evidence and buying them the time they needed to vanish into the underbelly of New York. 1 year later, the Mediterranean sun didn't just shine on the Amalfi coast, it seemed to anoint it. High above the Tyrrhenian Sea, the Villa Timbrone in Ravello stood as a testament to centuries of power and wealth. It was a fortress of white stone, lemon groves, and silence. To the tourists in the town below, it was a historic landmark. To the financial world, it was the private retreat of the reclusive CEO of VHI Global. To Dominic Valenti, it was the first place in his life where he didn't have to sit with his back to the wall. Dominic stood on the infinity terrace, leaning against the ancient stone balustrade. The air smelled of sea salt and blooming jasmine. He wore a suit of cream-colored linen, tailor-made in Naples, with the top buttons of his shirt undone. The perpetual furrow between his brows, the mark of a man constantly anticipating betrayal, had smoothed out. He looked younger than his 35 years, though his eyes remained as sharp and dark as espresso. He took a sip of a vintage Barolo and checked his watch. Patek Philippe. No ticking sound, just smooth, silent precision. "You're brooding, Dom. It lowers the property value." Dominic turned. Walking across the terrace was Silvio. The old consigliere looked out of place in the Italian sun, still wearing his heavy charcoal wool suit despite the heat. He refused to adapt to the climate, just as he had initially refused to adapt to the new business model. "I'm not brooding, Silvio," Dominic said, setting his glass down. "I'm projecting quarterly earnings." Silvio grunted, dropping a heavy leather briefcase onto the wrought iron table. "Earnings. In my day, we counted cash in the back of a pork store. Now I have to learn what EBITDA means. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization," a voice called out. Lexi stepped out from the villa's French doors. She was breathtaking. The nervous, oversized uniform and the messy bun of the waitress at the Obsidian were distant memories. She wore a dress of emerald silk that moved like water around her frame, catching the light. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves around a face that had regained its color and confidence. She didn't look like a survivor anymore. She looked like a conqueror. She walked to the table, picking up a tablet. "And for the record, Silvio, our EBITDA is up 42% since we acquired the shipping logistics firm in Marseille." Silvio looked at her with a mixture of grumbling annoyance and profound respect. He pulled a cigar from his pocket. Yeah, the shipping firm. The one we bought legally." "Hostile takeover," Lexi corrected, tapping the screen. "We bought the debt, forced the board to resign, and installed our own directors. It was brutal, aggressive, and completely legal. The SEC didn't even blink." Dominic watched her, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. This was the dynamic now, the gun and the calculator. What's the update on New York? Dominic asked, his tone shifting to business. Silvio lit his cigar, puffing smoke into the pristine air. The 5 families are in chaos. With Luca gone and the Russians dismantled by the feds, there was a power vacuum. The Gambettis tried to move on our construction contracts in Jersey. Dominic's eyes hardened. The predator wasn't gone. He was just sleeping. Do I need to fly back? No, Lexi interjected smoothly. I handled it. Dominic and Silvio both looked at her. You handled the Gambetti crime family? Dominic asked. I didn't send soldiers, Dominic, Lexi said, pouring herself a glass of sparkling water. I sent auditors. I tipped off the Department of Labor about their pension fund management. Their accounts are frozen pending a federal investigation. They can't pay their crews. Last I heard, their capos were defecting to our logistics union just to get a paycheck. Silvio let out a dry, barking laugh. She killed them with paperwork, cold. It's cleaner than bullets, Lexi said, though her eyes held a steely glint. And the legal fees they're paying, those go to the law firm we own. We're making money off their destruction. Dominic walked over to her, sliding his arm around her waist. He kissed her temple. Remind me never to make you angry. Too late, she whispered, leaning into him. Silvio stood up, buttoning his jacket. All right. I have the papers for the vineyard acquisition in Tuscany. The owner is stubborn. He doesn't want to sell. Make him an offer he can't refuse, Dominic said automatically. I'll offer him 10% above market value and a seat on the advisory board, Lexi corrected. Greed works better than fear, Dominic. It lasts longer. Silvio shook his head, picking up his briefcase. I'm going to get a drink. A real drink. This wine tastes like grapes. I need whiskey. He lumbered off toward the villa, leaving them alone on the edge of the world. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning orange. The silence returned, but it was a comfortable silence now. Dominic turned Lexi to face him. He ran his hands down her arms, resting them on her waist. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Do you miss it? He asked softly. Miss what? The noise, the rush, being the smartest person in a room full of idiots on Wall Street. Lexi thought about it. She looked at the horizon. I miss the math sometimes, but on Wall Street, I was just a number to them, an asset to be used until I burned out. With you. She looked up at him, her green eyes searching his. With you, I'm a partner. You're more than a partner, Dominic said. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. For a second, old instincts flared in Lexi's mind, the motion of reaching for a weapon. But Dominic didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a small, velvet box. Lexi froze. Dominic, I never did pay you, he said, his voice dropping to that low, rough timbre that sent shivers down her spine. Pay me for what? For the advice. That night at the Obsidian. He opened the box. Inside wasn't just a diamond. It was a flawless, emerald-cut diamond, flanked by 2 sapphires. It was heavy, ancient, and undeniably arrogant. It was a ring fit for royalty, or for the wife of a man who owned half the waterfront in New York. Silvio says I should have given you this months ago, Dominic said, taking the ring out. But I wanted to wait until the books were balanced, until I could offer you a life that didn't involve hiding in coal chutes. He took her left hand. His grip was warm, calloused, and possessive. Alexandra Graves, he said, using her full name. You saved my life. You saved my family. You took a criminal enterprise and turned it into a dynasty. But the smartest thing you ever did was look at a man holding a gun and decide to critique his spreadsheet. Lexi laughed, a sound that was half sob. Tears pricked her eyes. I love you, Lexi, Dominic said, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Marry me. Be the CEO of this family. Be the CEO of me. Lexi looked at the ring, catching the dying light of the sun. Then she looked at Dominic. She saw the man who had dragged her through the rain, who had stitched up his own wounds, who had burned down a building to keep her safe. Yes, she whispered. Then, louder. Yes, on one condition. Dominic raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk touching his lips. Negotiating until the end? What's the condition? I want a prenup, she said seriously. Dominic laughed, throwing his head back. You want a prenup? Lexi, I'm giving you everything. What could you possibly want to protect? I want it in writing, she said, stepping closer, her hands resting on his chest. That no matter what happens, no matter how legitimate we get, you never stop looking at me the way you did in that alley. Dominic's expression sobered. The playful lover vanished, replaced by the intense, dangerous man she had fallen for. He lowered his head until their foreheads touched. That, he murmured against her lips, is a non-negotiable asset. It's yours forever. He kissed her then, a deep, searing kiss that felt like a seal on a contract. It tasted of wine and promise. As they pulled apart, Dominic reached into his pocket one last time. Oh, he said. I almost forgot the signing bonus. He pulled out a crumpled, water-stained piece of paper. It was stiff with age and had a coffee stain on the corner. The $100 bill. He pressed it into her hand. $100, Dominic said softly. The best investment I ever made. Lexi looked down at the bill. She remembered the fear she had felt that night, the rain soaking her cheap uniform, the arrogant mobster flicking this bill onto the table to humiliate her. She looked at the ring on her finger. Then she looked at the villa, the sea, and the man who would burn the world down for her. She tucked the $100 bill into the neckline of her silk dress, right against her heart. You know, she said, a wicked smile spreading across her face as she backed toward the villa doors, pulling him by the lapels of his linen suit. Technically, with inflation and my current consulting rates, you still owe me about $50. Dominic laughed, the sound echoing off the cliffs. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her over the threshold of the terrace, out of the twilight and into the warmth of their home. I'll work it off, he promised. The glass doors closed, shutting out the world. Outside, the sun finally set on the Amalfi coast. The darkness came, but there was no fear in it anymore. The books were balanced, the debts were paid, and the king and queen of the new world had just begun their reign. And that is how a $100 tip turned into a $1 billion empire. From a rainy diner in New York to a villa in Italy, Dominic and Lexi proved that sometimes the sharpest weapon isn't a gun, it's a calculator. I hope you enjoyed this original story. If you loved the twists, the romance, and the sheer audacity of Lexi taking down a crime family with a spreadsheet, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What did you think of the ending? Do you think Dominic really went fully legal, or are they still up to some tricks? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, mafia romance, revenge dramas, and unexpected twists, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.